My name is Gay Daly, and I'd like to read you the opening scene from a novel I wrote called Miss Havilland. Miss Havilland is a fiction, but the book grew from a handful of facts and legends about my grandmother's first cousin, a brilliant mathematician who went to work in military intelligence soon after the United States entered the First World War in 1917. In the book, Evelyn has a cousin, Billy, who is more like a brother. They are separated during the war. He works in a field hospital while she interviews German prisoners captured on the battlefield. After the armistice, the two of them plan to travel home together, and as the story begins, Evelyn is in Paris, waiting to meet Billy's train. The old Billy would have been the first off the train. I searched every face, hoping the next would be his. When the last straggler, a weary-looking woman wearing a ratty fur coat, passed the barrier, fear had begun to poke its bony fingers into my chest. I was holding a handkerchief Billy's mother had made for me, embroidered with lilies of the valley. Startled by a ripping sound, I looked down and saw I'd been twisting it in my hands. Staring at the torn bit of linen, I fought back tears. I tried the tobacco in case Billy had gone to buy cigarettes or a newspaper. I checked the cafe. I went into the street. Back in the station, I made myself sit on a bench to calm down. People passed by, amputees with crutches, men with empty sleeves, women dressed in black, all bearing their sorrow with dignity. How could I justify falling apart in front of them? Wherever Billy was, he had come through the war miraculously, unhurt. Finally, I spotted him leaning against a wall, beneath the board that announced arrivals and departures, smoking a cigarette and watching a scrawny pigeon strutting at his feet. I almost wept with relief, but then I thought, why isn't he searching for me? 4 years earlier, when the Germans were closing in on Paris, Billy had climbed aboard a train in California, eager to join the fight. As his train left the station that morning, despite the grave danger he was heading toward, he'd waved and blown a last few kisses. The man who dropped his cigarette and crushed it with the toe of his boot was a grim shadow of that boy. Approaching quietly, I touched his arm. He touched my cheek with his fingertips, tracing its curve the way a blind man might, as if to make sure the cheek was really mine. But when I put my arms around him, his body felt stiff, like an iron bar. I whispered in his ear, as a mother would to an injured child, "It's okay. It's over. I love you. You're tired. We're going home." In a low voice, so soft I almost couldn't hear it, he murmured, "I love you too." Smoothing the front of his khaki shirt, he tucked it in, checked his watch, and reached up to ruffle my hair. "There wasn't a blessed thing to eat on that train. I'm hungry, and you better be too." That sounded so like the old Billy that I risked teasing him. "Didn't they feed you at that hospital? You're skinny as a garter snake on a diet." He shrugged. Dinner was a series of shrugs. I asked if they'd closed down his hospital. "Nope, still open." I asked if the surgeon he'd assisted was still there. "Mm-hmm." I asked if he needed rest. I told him the news from home. What did he want to see in Paris? His short answers led nowhere. Not tired? We could see any sights I wanted to see. I could choose a play for us. As he sat in silence over the dinner he barely touched, I had time, too much time to study him. His skin was patchy and sallow, his forehead graven with deep lines. In the carefree days before the war, when he was repairing his dilapidated car, his hands had always been covered with grease, his fingernails black. His hands had always been covered with cuts, fingernails black with grease. Now those nails were trimmed and clean, the skin unnaturally white. At the hospital, he'd had to scrub them constantly to ward off infections. His hands were so dry, they looked like they'd been dusted with flour. After the waiter cleared the table, Billy took out a cigarette and tried to light it, but his hand shook so violently he could not strike the match. I had to look away. As soon as he paid the check, we left the bistro and walked across the Pont Neuf to our pension. It was still early, and the streets were filled with crowds, enjoying one of the first pleasant evenings of the year. Many nights, while waiting for Billy, I had walked along the stone embankment by the Seine, watching the reflection of the lights dip and gleam on the water, looking forward to the night when we would be able to walk together along the river and begin to talk about the years we'd been apart. But on that first night, he didn't have the heart for it, and neither did I.